Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really excited to see everyone who's here, who's joining us. I know we have folks all across the country registered to join us today, which is very exciting. So we're going to give everyone about 60 to 90 seconds to get settled. So if you need to grab some water, grab a snack, feel free to do that. In the meantime, would love to hear where folks are coming from. So if you want to go into the chat, let us know what institution you're coming from, where you're dialing in from today. Would love to see that. All right, looks like we have folks from all over the place. I'm seeing New York, Chicago, Hawaii, CSU East Bay. I'm located not too far away from there, so that's great to see. Wow, this is great. Wonderful. Well, it looks like we've had an excellent turnout today. So again, welcome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I think that this is going to be a really engaging conversation. So let's go ahead and start off with some introductions. So hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Moran, and I'm our Senior Content Manager here at CourseDog. So I will be kind of playing the host of this webinar today and working alongside Dennis here, who I'll go ahead and introduce himself now.
Hello, everybody. Dennis Frohlich. I'm a professor of media and journalism at Commonwealth University. I'm also the chair of our university curriculum committee. I'll explain all that as the webinar unfolds. I saw some other people here from Erie, PA, and some other institutions in the state, so that's fun to see. I'm beginning my 11th year here at Commonwealth University this fall.
Perfect. And then Janet, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Janet Walraven. I'm the project management team lead here at CourseDog. In the 4 years that I've been here, I've really done exclusively curriculum and catalog implementations, and I've really become the subject matter expert on the topic. I saw someone in the chat say you're from USF. I'm located in Tampa, so good to see someone who's local, and I'm excited to be here. Thanks, everybody.
Amazing. Thanks, Janet. Well, before we dive into things, I want to give just a really quick overview of what we're going to talk about. So first, I want to set the stage and make sure that we're all on the same page. So Dennis is going to walk through the merger that led to Commonwealth University of Pennsylvania, kind of what this meant for their curriculum, and the committee that was really created to help tackle this comprehensive work. Next, we'll walk through how the committee actually went about reviewing and creating this unified curriculum and some of the challenges that they faced during this process. And then we'll go ahead and go into, what are some of the lessons learned that they had coming out of, this really large project? And then, coming out of this, moving to a new curriculum system, how could they do this better? How could they take some of those lessons learned moving into their work going forward? And of course, we'll talk about, what this means in terms of change management, collaboration, timing, resourcing, all of those good things. We'll also have a couple of polls throughout today's sessions. I always love hearing from audience members, hearing what all of you are working on at your institutions. So make sure to look out for those. And then, of course, we'll leave time for Q&A at the end. You'll see that there is a Q&A function on your little bar. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in there, and we'll make sure to get to those at the end of the presentation. And then one last final thing, I know we always get this question. Yes, you will receive a link to the deck and the recording. That should be coming through tomorrow, so you will have that for your reference. All right, well, I think we can go ahead and get into things. As I just mentioned, we want to quickly set the stage for our conversation. So we're really going to quickly walk through that merger that led to Commonwealth University of Pennsylvania and talk a little bit more about how the curriculum and those governance structures were formalized. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to Dennis now.
All right, thank you, Bridget. So my university, Commonwealth University, it's part of a Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education, known as PASHE. I saw somebody else in the chat also from one of our sibling institutions in PASHE today. PASHE had, prior to the integration, 14 public universities spread across the state. And like many universities across the nation, has experienced enrollment decline over the last decade plus at this point. The high watermark of PASHE enrollment was somewhere around 2010. And since then, student population goes down, which impacts budget, which impacts staffing levels, faculty numbers, all these sorts of things. And so these trends were going on for, years. The pandemic exacerbated that. As many of you can remember, if you were teaching in the pandemic, we sent all the students home. That really seriously impacted the budget. And it was slow for some of those numbers to bounce back, enrollment numbers. So this conversation to integrate these universities really started in that context. And our state system decided to take 3 universities on kind of the central northern side of the state, Bloomsburg University, Lock Haven University, and Mansfield University, merge them all together into one super university called Commonwealth University, which has 3 different campuses. There's actually a 4th one listed on the map here, Clearfield, which was a satellite campus from Lock Haven, which is actually going to be closing in a year or 2. So we have these 3 main campuses, and the same thing happened in the western part of the state. 3 other universities in the PASHE system merged together at the same time. And so that merger officially began on paper in summer 2022. Next slide, Bridget. So there's a lot of things that go into the merger, coming up with a name, coming up with identity, administration, team, etc., all these sorts of things. What we're talking about today is the curriculum specifically. And one thing that our administration decided, which I think was a great decision, was that rather than take one of the campus's curriculum and basically force it onto the other campuses in the new created university, the goal was to create one unified curriculum that would take basically the pluses of all the 3 campuses, the traditions of the 3 campuses, the program strengths, etc., and kind of unify it, merge it all together into one same curriculum across all 3 campuses. And so that we merged together in summer 2022 and basically had one academic year, maybe a little bit more if you count the next summer after that, to get this curriculum in place. So that involved a lot of pieces. One of the pieces that involved was creating a new general education system. Each of the 3 campuses prior to our integration were all using different general education systems. Of course, there's commonalities as far as composition and science classes and math classes, etc. But there was also some differences in terms of which types of classes students needed to take to fulfill their general education requirements. So we needed to get everybody on the same page with general education. And then on the 3rd point there, evaluating our different strengths, the program array looked different on each of the 3 campuses prior to integration. Each campus had their own programs and departments that they had strengths in, that they had historical successes with. And so we wanted to try to keep what was working well as much as possible in the new integrated university. And so that involved all sorts of meetings and conversations, faculty getting to know each other, administrators getting to know new departments and programs that were now put under their purview, to try to figure out what was the strongest programs going forward and how do we create basically an attractive program array that's going to keep encouraging students to enroll in our institution. As far as the curriculum work goes, the decision was made early on to create what was known as the interim curriculum committee. That was just a very small group of people that was charged with creating what the new structure would be, creating the timeline for reviewing curriculum, and creating the forms and procedures, etc. And that work happened in 2022, summer 22, fall 22. And then in winter, basically winter 23, is when our university curriculum committee, the more formal official one, was established, which I've been a part of since that time. And so one thing that we deliberated quite extensively was, how is this committee going to be comprised? And what we ended up going with is what we thought of as kind of the U.S. Senate model, where each campus had equal representation regardless of their size. This was very important for our colleagues at Mansfield and Lock Haven in particular, because Bloomsburg campus is about 2/3 of the size of the new integrated university. So Bloomsburg is much bigger than the other two universities combined in terms of student enrollment. And so there was this fear that Bloomsburg was going to come in and basically kind of dictate how all of this stuff would run. And there were great ideas on how curriculum should work on the other campuses, and we didn't want to lose that. So we ended up with a committee composed of 6 people from each campus. So they were same amount of people, plus there was one non-aligned faculty member. With the integration, 5 colleges initially were created. Now we actually have 3, but 5 were created initially. So each college had 1 representative, except for liberal arts, which was by far the largest college, had 2 representatives. So this committee was formed, and our basically tasks, our responsibilities were reviewing program and course proposals to merge all of these together and to get everything approved, but also to create bylaws for how this committee would function, to establish new policies, and also to set up the other curriculum committees that were intended. Because of how quickly the integration was happening, just the initial university curriculum committee existed, but we eventually set up a general education council, a graduate council, and then college curriculum committees as well.
Thanks, Dennis. That's super helpful context. And, I think this conversation is really interesting because, I see we have folks on the line who are part of some of these state university systems, but I imagine that not everyone here is going to be, undergoing an institutional merger. But, that being said, I think that a lot of the work that, Dennis and his colleagues have done is still really relevant. And I like to think about it as, what are kind of the different levels we can maybe apply some of these lessons learned that Dennis is going to be walking through. So I think that really the basic level, I think of it as, even at smaller scales, there's still so many opportunities to evaluate your curriculum review processes. So maybe it's just your academic department, they're looking to standardize how those proposals are submitted, reviewed, or approved. Or maybe at your institution, each department has their own process. So you're thinking about, how can we streamline it maybe at the college level or across all undergraduate programs or graduate programs. So I think really, regardless of why you're here today, I really think that these lessons learned are hopefully going to be applicable and helpful for you. So, Dennis will spend some time running through, the large project that he really helped it with, and how to think through maybe how can we avoid some of those pitfalls, and how can we really think critically and intentionally about how we're actually moving those curriculum proposals through a system. And so with all of that being said, I want to kick off our first poll here and really hear from you all. Why are you here today? Why are you thinking about your curriculum review process? Yeah, what's really brought you here today? So let's go ahead and get that poll launched here. We'll leave it up for about 60 seconds or so that way we can make sure everyone gets the chance. It looks like I'm seeing these responses come in. If we, missed what you're thinking about, feel free to go to the chat and drop that in there, and would love to share that out as well. Okay, I'm seeing these responses come in here. This is great. We'll leave it open for about another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll go ahead and share out the results so everyone can see them. Okay. So this is really interesting. I think we have a really great mix here. It looks like the top response here is at the institution level. So I think this is great. Dennis mentioned that he was part of their overall university curriculum committee. So I think that he can really speak to that. But I'm also seeing other levels here. So at the college level, at the department level, I think this is great. Dennis, any thoughts here about what you're seeing?
Yeah, so when we merged together, I mean, really we started with the big picture and we, as I said, worked our way down to creating other committees like graduate council and college curriculum committees, et cetera. So we're actually still kind of in the process of figuring out how the colleges work because each of the colleges are different. They have different needs and so forth. And departments are even more different. You know, some departments are very, very small. Some departments are quite large. You know, some departments have lots of different disciplines kind of housed in the same place that really don't go together, but administratively they're put together. So, yeah, there's definitely opportunities at all levels to streamline the curriculum review process because it can be so different even within an institution, college by college or department by department.
Yes, that's a great point, Dennis. Well, now we're going to get into some of the specifics about how Dennis and his team went about this work. So they'll talk about, how they actually went through this process of reviewing the curriculum across the three former institutions to, really help merge it into one cohesive curriculum. So we'll walk through some of the specifics, including what their process looked like, the timeline, and some of those challenges as well. So I'll go ahead and pass it back over to Dennis now.
Thank you. So how we began in the beginning with our integrated or interim curriculum committee is that proposals began in what we called sub working groups, which were basically the first chance for departments to get to know each other across the three institutions. Because now basically almost every department existed on three campuses, right? So instead of having three different English departments, you had one English department instead of three different math departments, etc. So there was a lot of getting to know you type of work that was done in the beginning of departments trying to figure out, okay, well, this is what our math curriculum looked like. This is what your math curriculum looks like. There's some commonalities naturally, but there's also some differences. So how do we, what's the best way forward to make this, merger effective? So there was a lot of discussions happening in the department level to create an initial sort of array of courses and what majors, minors, et cetera, they wanted to have at the start of the integrated university. Those proposals were formalized and then they were reviewed by the college dean. Now, at the time, we had 5 colleges, and so proposals would go there, and that stage took a while for proposals to get through, sometimes months, because there were so many programs submitting proposals at basically the same time. Deans are trying to get to know their new colleagues, their new programs, etc. And so that stage took quite a while. It ended up being sort of a bottleneck in our initial process. Then there was an open comment period. So once it made it through the college dean level, proposals would be emailed out to the campus community for a week. Do you have any comments or concerns about this proposal? That was very important to put on there because there ended up being sometimes significant overlap in the types of courses or programs offered across the institution. So for example, a web design course at one of the universities, that web design course may have been housed in computer science, but at a different university, it was housed in graphic design, and a different university, it was housed in media and journalism, right? And so you had programs or courses like that that didn't have a consistent home. And so merging together, there needed to be discussions about, well, which department, which college does that make the most sense in going forward? Not necessarily have the same things they had before integration. So that sometimes identified some pressure points or some concerns among faculty. Then all those proposals came to our committees. So the ICC in the beginning was 9 members. They looked at all of these proposals for the first semester or so, and then that work was passed on to the University Curriculum Committee. So at this time, we didn't have any other curriculum committees. It was just this one curriculum committee that reviewed the proposals, and then finally they would go on to the provost for approval. Technologically, how this worked is we weren't using CourseDog in the beginning. It would have been nice in retrospect to have CourseDog set up in the beginning, but things were moving so quickly that that wasn't part of the conversation. So proposals were actually created in Microsoft Word. We started with PDFs, but those become cumbersome to edit and modify as time goes on. So we switched over to Microsoft Word. There was a series of SharePoint folders denoting these different review steps that we had a staff member, full-time staff member, who was our curriculum coordinator, who did amazing work trying to shepherd all of these documents, thousands of documents from folder to folder and place to place, and try to keep track of exactly who needs to be reviewing it next, who needs to sign off on it, where does it need to go after it's reviewed, etc. And then all these proposals eventually went to our provost and were put into a kind of a shared approved documents folder at the end so that everybody could see all of the proposals. But this became a very cumbersome system to navigate because you had literally thousands of files, hundreds of different folders. It would take a long time for these folders to load because there were so many proposals in there, etc. But this is the best we could do at the time given the speedy timeline that we were under. And so this is what we were working with initially. This is the bulk of our work was done under this process, and later we'll talk about how we switched to CourseDog. So the timeline of how this work was completed, our university formally merged or integrated together in summer 2022. For the first academic year, 22-23, every university still used their pre-existing programs and general education curriculum, etc. So the first year the students were part of Commonwealth University, it was mostly in name only because they were still functioning under the old university's curricula. So we had that basically first academic year of integration to get all of this stuff done. So the ICC reviewed the first 1,000 or so proposals in summer and fall 2022. Again, this is a 9-member committee reviewing all these proposals. It was quite a lot of work. Then they passed it on to the University Curriculum Committee, which I started that work as a member at the time and later became chair. And we worked multiple meetings per week, all winter, all spring, all summer, trying to get even more proposals through. At the same time, also creating bylaws, creating election procedures for how to rotate new members onto the committee going forward, creating initial policies, etc. So there was a lot of different work going on. Some of that work needed to go before our union, before our administrators to make sure we're all aligned on the same page. So there's lots of conversation. Basically, we're trying to juggle multiple things simultaneously in this one just jam-packed year of work.
All right. Well, I would love to move on to our second poll question now. I know Dennis briefly touched on some of the challenges they're experiencing, and we'll get into that more. But would love to hear from you all. What are you experiencing at your institutions? What are some of the pain points in that curriculum review process? So again, we'll leave this open for about 60 seconds or so. Okay, this is great. I'm seeing lots of responses coming in here. Definitely an interesting mix. So excited to share these out and chat through these. Okay, we can probably go ahead and close the poll now and share out those results so everyone can see them. Okay, so very interesting. The top one here, reaching a consensus with stakeholders. I'm sure, Dennis, you have a lot of experience with that, especially as you mentioned, working with new colleagues, getting to know each other through this process. So I'm excited that we'll be able to chat about that more. But Dennis, any thoughts to add here?
Yeah, the consensus thing, I mean, was very important because, like I said, our provost decided we want an integrated curriculum. Well, that meant that we all had to work together on this, right? Rather than just imposing a curriculum on all the campuses simultaneously. And so, ideally, this will lead to a better final result, but there's some pain in the process of getting everybody aligned on the same page because. We're all put into new departments with people we don't know, even though we come from the same disciplinary background. You all know that even within a discipline, there can be radically different approaches to teaching and research and scholarship, etc. And so trying to get everybody on the same page was difficult. Lots of these kinds of Zoom meetings because that was the only way they could work because we're on multiple campuses. That's the only way we could do it. And so talking to little heads of people in these little boxes and trying to get to know each other, that was definitely a painful process to go through.
Perfect. Well, I think this segues really well. I think about 20% of folks said deadlines was a challenge. So, Dennis, I know that you have a lot of thoughts here.
Yeah. Yes. So the obviously, if you just looking at the amount of work we went through in 1 year, it was very difficult to do all of this in one academic year. I think we maybe bit off more than we could chew, had some lofty ideas of what was possible, but it's challenging to do all of this work to get all the relevant parties to review the proposals at the time they are supposed to. Bottlenecks appeared in the process. It's not anybody's fault per se. It's just something that happens with the volume of workload. And so there would be sometimes departments, they had to get their initial proposals in by whatever the date was. I'll just throw out October 1st or whatever of that first academic year. And then things would sit sometimes for months before they would hear anything. And so they didn't necessarily know where the proposal was, what the outcome was going to be, etc. And so having deadlines in place, I mean, motivates us to try to get this work done. But because of that hard deadline of trying to get things ready for fall 2023, there was a lot of extra work that went on. The curriculum committee, like I said, it was 19 members. We worked overtime in the winter 2023 and the summer 2023, which is a substantial cost to the university, just to try to review all of these proposals that come in. And we didn't quite get through everything. There was a few things outstanding for various reasons that kind of got extensions because it just wasn't possible to get everything in place by fall 2023. But we got, I'd say, 90+% of the work in. But because we were pushing so quickly and we had all of these things to review, we couldn't necessarily always give sufficient time to the proposals. And so sometimes mistakes were made in terms of a course not being offered in the proper modality that it needed to be, or the credits being wrong, or the numbers not adding up correctly for a program, or maybe unintended issues of general education, certain categories of classes being better represented than other categories, etc. And so sometimes it's hard to see that in the moment when the volume of the work is so pressing, that it wasn't until the academic years following that we actually kind of went back to do some cleanup work to realize, okay, sometimes things were missed. There was maybe confusion about how a particular, course or program was supposed to operate, etc. And so since then, the last 2 years, we've done kind of some cleanup work of getting some things fixed that shouldn't have, unfortunately slipped through in the beginning. Second challenge was agreement, getting everybody on the same page. We had to get to know all new colleagues, all new administrators. Some people, we got to get to know your new dean, new provost, new president, etc. There was different cultures on the three campuses. Mansfield and Lock Haven were smaller campuses by faculty numbers and student populations. So the faculty were a little bit more intimate with each other. They knew each other very well because there was less of them compared to Bloomsbury, where I'm at, which was a larger campus. And so getting to know people was difficult. There were disagreements about how to approach different programs. Sometimes within a department where one campus really liked the way they had a major structured on their campus, another campus liked the way they had it structured, and that both things couldn't exist simultaneously. They had to come to some agreement on which path forward they wanted to take the program. And then committee members and staff members, in addition to all of these curriculum things that we were trying to get done, we still had our normal teaching loads. We still had to do research. We still had to advise students and all the other normal duties that need to be done to make the university function. And so this was basically a lot of added work on top of kind of the normal work level. And so that created some stress among our colleagues because we weren't always aligned on the same page when it came to the proper path forward.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing some questions come through in the chat and Q&A. So just want to acknowledge that we're seeing those and thank you everyone for those. We definitely will get to those at the end of the presentation, but just wanted to acknowledge that because always great to see that engagement there. All right, well, a third challenge we want to quickly touch on is file management, which I know is not always the most exciting topic, but a challenge that I hear come up again and again from institutions that we work with. So, like Dennis mentioned, these files might be living across different emails, online folders, maybe other systems that you're using. So sometimes it can be a challenge to really find and access, a given proposal that you're searching for. I probably can't even count the number of times I've heard someone tell me, "Oh yeah, the person who owned this folder no longer works at our institution. So who
Mhm.
can access it? How can I actually go about and see it?" So, I think this isn't just frustrating in terms of the effort required, but also from that transparency and accountability perspective as well. And then, of course, it's also hard when you're thinking about keeping track of all those changes that are being made, knowing which version is the most up to date, which one has the most accurate information. So I'm sure that many of you have probably experienced these challenges, and Dennis, you've certainly seen them play out firsthand. So can you kind of walk us through your experience and walk us through, what are some of the impacts that you saw as a result of these challenges? And at what point was it really no longer sustainable for you all at Commonwealth?
Yeah, so all of these things came up frequently with our process. People, I think there was a certain amount of grace or understanding that people knew this wasn't necessarily this wasn't the best ideal way to do this, but we had to have something to review things. But people knew that there were problems with the SharePoint, the files, keeping track of everything, etc. And so when CourseDog came along, one of the things that we did a lot was basically sort of pitch it to people as, hey, one of the things it can do is solve a lot of these problems, right? And so people were getting frustrated, like I said, with proposals getting held up for months. And we could say, well, in CourseDog, you can see with your proposal exactly what stage of review it's at, how long it's been there, what comments have been made, etc. You can go check it at any time. You don't need to ask a staff member where your proposal is, etc. So having all of these challenges front of mind helped us when we transitioned to CourseDog to know how to basically promote it to people and say, well, this is why we're moving to this different system. This is why we have to learn a whole new technology system. Here's the benefits that will come with that.
Yes, I think that that's such a good point there, Dennis. So I think as you just touched on in the past few slides, it kind of became clear that moving forward, you really wanted to think about, what new system could you be using. So we'll walk through kind of what that transition looked like, and then what Commonwealth's process actually looks like today.
All right. So summer 2023, which was basically when we were wrapping up the work of this initial push to get all the programs and courses ready for fall 23, there was a subcommittee of our university curriculum committee devised to begin working on Course Dog. And at the time, the associate provost who pitched it said, okay, we have this new thing coming on. We need some people to set up some forms and workflows. I just kind of maybe foolishly volunteered, not knowing what amount of work that this would involve to get it set up. But there was about 5 or 6 of us on the curriculum side, not talking about scheduling and other things, but 5 or 6 of us on the curriculum side said, okay, yeah, let's start working on this. And so we met weekly, if not sometimes multiple weeks, both with CourseDog, our implementation team, and internally as well, to basically take those Microsoft Word forms, translate them into CourseDog, rebuild our workflows, set up permissions, etc. And so we worked throughout the summer and fall, even into winter. And then when spring 24 came, we launched CourseDog. And we put out training videos, we had office hours, we met with faculty one-on-one to help them fill out the new forms and push the right buttons to move them through the system, etc. And so that's how we made this switch to CourseDog. So this is now not quite 2 years into our integration from when we integrated in summer 2022. And throughout 2024, we actually used both systems simultaneously because a lot of proposals were started under the old SharePoint system, and people had already gone through so much change. We didn't want to make them redo all of their proposals into CourseDog. And so we kept both systems going throughout 2024, just so that we could try to show a little bit of mercy to people and don't make them have to redo work again on their proposals.
Yeah, so we hear that from a lot of partners who we work with, and I think it's also helpful too to sometimes have that soft transition period as well to help people get acclimated. So I think that's a great point, Dennis. Okay, so now that you all have moved to Coursera, kind of what does this look like in practice once we are into that period where everyone is using it? So CourseDog at Commonwealth was used exclusively for new curriculum proposals, whether that was at the undergraduate, graduate, or general education level. I know I saw a question in the chat about the types of proposals that were in here, so hopefully this slide gives a little bit more insight into that. But really, over the past couple of years, the Commonwealth team was hard at work creating these new workflows and forms to really help establish this more systematic curriculum review process. So stakeholders could go in there and use forms that were pre-built by the Commonwealth team to submit changes for courses and programs. And these forms could really vary depending on if the changes were large or small, or if they fit into some of the more specific categories, like for experimental courses or for general education. And once that form was then completed, it would then be routed through an appropriate workflow that was designed really to make sure that all of the relevant stakeholders could then review that proposal, sign off, make any comments before it would then move along to the next step. And similarly, as the forms, these workflows might have been short or long, depending on, how big the change was and who needs to review it. So I'll let Dennis walk through one of the more specific examples here and what it actually looks like in practice.
Yeah, so this is what we call our master workflow. This is for all new courses, new programs, and also anybody basically doing significant revisions to existing courses or programs, adding new requirements, for example, changing around a course dramatically. You might think, well, we just created everything in 22, 23, but already, in the 2 years since, we've already been revising programs and courses, sometimes to fix mistakes or unintended issues that showed up, other times just to be adaptable to how the disciplines evolve. So our current setup is now much lengthier than the one initially. So sometimes it could take up to a semester plus for a proposal to make it through the entire system. They start with the department curriculum committee and the department chair signs off on it. Then it goes to our college dean, who can decide if they want to send those proposals to the college curriculum committee or if they want to just skip past it and give a final recommendation. For various reasons, they might decide one way or the other. Those college curriculum committees they've been existing for about a year now, but they're still kind of in their infancy, so we're still figuring out that piece. Once it makes it through the college, And by the way, there's 2-week deadlines on the college dean, the college curriculum committee. This is intended to try to speed up some of that bottleneck we were experiencing in the beginning of the integration. Once it makes it through the college, then it goes to open comment for a week. The open comment works much better than before. Most people don't comment on a proposal, but from time to time, something comes up and a department says, hey, that course looks very similar to another course we already have on the books. Or, this course, you're requiring it for your students, but we don't have the faculty capacity to teach students for that program. So the open comment period is very important to catch things like that. Anything graduate related goes to our graduate council. Anything general education related, which is just undergraduate courses, goes to our GEC. Once it's made it through those stages, then it comes to the University Curriculum Committee. Now, ideally, because all these stages are here, problems and issues with courses, programs are being identified early on so that when it makes it to the University Curriculum Committee, it's not as much work as it was initially in the initial integration because we're not the first ones seeing the proposal anymore. Lots of other people have laid their eyes on it. So the proposals are typically in much better shape now than they were 3 years ago. Then there's a brief administrative review stage where our curriculum coordinator just double checks to make sure there's no spelling mistakes and the credits, are calculated correctly, etc. And then finally, our provost signs off on it and the proposal is approved. Looking to the future, then we still have work to do. So all these different workflows and forms that Bridget mentioned a couple slides ago, we didn't start with that. It built up in complexity over the last 3 years. And so we're continuing to make refinements to our forms, our workflows, permissions of who's allowed to do what on particular stages. As more people are now being involved in the curriculum process, more committees, etc. We're listening to their needs, their concerns, their questions, etc., and adapting the forms and workflows as needed. We're continuing to work with our student information system to address some of these issues that came up in the initial integration. For example, PASHE has this requirement that students need to complete a certain number of advanced course credits for their undergraduate degree. That's something that we frankly didn't have time to really look at in the initial integration. And so last year we had a kind of special project to go through and designate all which classes were appropriate for advanced status. And that was a whole series of conversations. Sometimes credits are not listed correctly in courses, or because we exist on 3 campuses and we have these different modes of instructions, there's questions with the registrar about how to properly list courses so that students understand what they're taking. So we're still working with our registrar very frequently on those kinds of integration issues. And then on the policy level, we're still revising our policies, our workflows, how our elections work. We're providing training to people as these forms and workflows evolve, because now we've lived with it for 3 years now, and we're finding better things to tweak about it, to change, to make it, to improve it going forward. So it's always a work in progress. We're never quite finished. I have a whole list of things that I need to talk to my curriculum committee about in about 3 weeks here, of things that we need to tackle for the next academic year.
Great. So I think as Dennis highlighted, of course, implementing a new system is never going to be easy. So we'll walk through some of those lessons learned from this process over the past couple of years. Okay, so first thinking specifically about the actual technology part of the implementation. I'm sure most of you on the line will agree working with an SIS can be very challenging due to the sheer number of fields, amount of information they hold. And this, can pose challenges when you're thinking about how do we actually go ahead and integrate with it. So I think it's really helpful to think about, who on campus has, a really good understanding of how your data information is structured, and really being intentional about that to prevent some of the, headaches that might come later on down the road. And then, of course, there's also, of course, acclimating faculty and staff to a new system. So, users need training on it, practical guidance on, what type of actions they're going to need to actually take in the system. So, Dennis, I think that most of the information on this slide, most people on the line have probably experienced some of these challenges. What advice would you give to other institutions who are, proactively thinking about this, so they can really make sure that they have a successful implementation?
Yeah, a big thing, of course, is communication of keeping those lines of communication open between the administration, the faculty, the staff, et cetera, who have to implement all of these changes that are happening. Oftentimes, people didn't really understand how a new technology worked, why we were switching to it, if there were problems, it wasn't necessarily clear, what the problem was, how it would be fixed, et cetera. And so keeping communication open, of course, is very important here. And I guess setting the vision of why we are doing this and where we're going with it. They're acknowledging that pain of transition and the challenges that can come up, not trying to dismiss it, but to say, yes, it's a lot of work. Yes, it's challenging now, et cetera. But this is what we're working toward. This is what hopefully, these new technologies will help us improve going forward. Another big thing to consider for any institutions that are thinking of merging like this is that it took a lot of time and resources to make all of this happen. Realistically, evaluating how much time the integration could take, if the work can be divided in different ways, if more time can be given, I think that's always helpful if you have clear goals of what you're doing. If we could redo this, if I was in charge, if we could have had 2 years, for example, have 1 year just to do the general education component, and then the next year to do the rest of the curriculum, for example, that would have perhaps solved a lot of headache and maybe gotten some more faculty buy-in, etc. This took a lot of time to do. Faculty, like I said, they're doing all of these proposals on top of their normal workload. So there was overtime, there's release time, there was people doing summer work, winter work, etc. And that was necessary to meet these deadlines. And so that has an expense that comes along with it. There was also expenses with our student information system, hiring outside consultants, etc., to troubleshoot and help staff understand how the system worked and fixing integration problems, etc. And so there was, we don't want to, we assume everything is going to work out nicely, but we should better assume that there's going to be problems, that the timeline's going to slow down, there's going to be resource drags, unintended things that we can't anticipate in the beginning. We know that those things come up. So maybe setting our expectations a little bit more appropriately in the beginning to know that yes, that some of these things will be challenges for us. And finally, looking at how collaboration can help us. Our policies and forms can't just be established ahead of time, that in a vacuum. We had to talk to lots of different people on the team and across the university to make sure we're all on the same page. The team building component, this is something we didn't do enough of that I think would have really helped. But I might be biased being in the communication discipline, but I think it would have helped if we would have had some like face-to-face meetings, if we would have had some team building exercise, we would have done some things to get to know our colleagues, because so many of these colleagues, I've only seen them on Zoom after all these years, right? We're all on 3 different campuses. It was, we're all basically kind of pushed together into this one family and expected to play nice with each other, and that's sometimes challenging. And then finally, the workload, trying to manage the appropriate amount of steps in the process. Having fewer people speeds things up, but led for a larger workload on the remaining team.
Absolutely. And then I think, aside from that collaboration aspect that Dennis was just chatting through, what does change management look like from that higher organizational level? So, of course, that staff involvement is critical. Getting early buy-in, always really great to help increase your odds of success later on down the road. But then aside from that staff involvement, I think it's also essential to consider, the broader ecosystem of what's going on at your institution. So, first, are you rolling out other new technologies? Are other new systems being put in place simultaneously? And how much change are you asking your users to take on? And, could that potentially be an impediment if they're getting overwhelmed? And then second, what else is going on organizationally? Have there been recent changes in your organizational structure? Maybe there's been some leadership turnover. Just really making sure that you have a pulse on any other changes that are going on that might make it difficult to, really gain buy-in, sustain momentum, and keep everyone on the same page. So I really like to think of these as guiding questions to consider before starting a new implementation. Of course, you won't be able to necessarily control all of these factors, but at least being aware of them and being able to proactively address some of those questions that might come up. So Dennis, what tactics did you use at Commonwealth when it came to staff buy-in? As you were moving through implementation, how were you making sure that you were keeping everyone on the same page?
Yeah, like I alluded to a little bit earlier, trying to highlight those quick wins, those things that like here are some easy things that CourseDog has improved for us, like for example, tracking proposals, knowing what stage it's at, etc. Trying to explain to people why do I have to do this, learn this whole new system? Well, here's what it's doing for us. And once they started seeing proposals move faster through the system, etc., I think people started to buy into, yes, this is a much better system that we have in place now than what we had in the beginning.
Great. Well, we are almost at Q&A, but before we get there, want to run a final poll question here. So I know that we've talked a lot about kind of the operational aspect today, but we know, of course, that there are a lot of other reasons why you're doing this important work. So would love to hear from folks on the line. What's really motivating your institution to kind of reevaluate some of these processes? Okay, this is looking great. We'll keep it open for a few more seconds here. So if you still need to go ahead and drop your answer in here, but let's go ahead and close the poll now and share these results out. Okay, great. So you'll see that the top one here, reviewing curriculum for quality and student impact. I think this is wonderful. I think it really speaks to kind of the heart of this work and why it's so important now. I see someone just chatted me here. They said, all of the above, right? I think that all of this is super important work. So we're going to chat through kind of what this looks like in practice. I think that the poll results really align well with what we see here on the slide. So of course, speed, efficiency, all of those things are wonderful, but also thinking about, how are we making sure that our students are getting, the highest quality content and really making sure that it's aligned with the market, employer needs, and of course, our surrounding communities as well. And so before we get to Q&A, Dennis, I'll turn it back over to you once more. Where have you seen the biggest impact as a result of this work? What are some of the positive changes that have happened that, might not have otherwise really been put through as a result of this curriculum review?
Sure. So yes, this was a ton of work. Yes, the timeline wasn't reasonable, etc. But what this forced us to do, that middle point there, modernization, was to get all of our stuff updated at the same time. Some of the courses programs honestly hadn't been touched for years, if not decades, prior to the integration. Some of the like original approval documents, people didn't even know where they were for those courses. And so this forced all of us to basically do more than just put a fresh coat of paint on our programs, but to identify issues that we had, even with our own programs, of bottlenecks that we knew that students struggled with, for example, problems where there was overlap between different departments or colleges, etc. And so it really freshened everything up and got moved our curriculum forward in a positive direction that would have taken a much longer time to do if we didn't have this external pressure to integrate so quickly.
Absolutely. And I'll turn it over to Janet for just the quickest of overviews about CourseDog, and then we will spend the rest of our time on all these wonderful questions that we've been receiving.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely want to get you to Q&A. So real quick overview here. Course Talk is really about the interoperability and driving efficiency in academic operations, which, we talked a lot about curriculum today, but more broadly, we help over 300 schools streamline their academic operations like as a whole. So instead of having multiple systems with CourseDog, you get one platform, and that will bidirectionally integrate with your SIS and your LMS. And so we can help handle everything from curriculum planning to scheduling, tracking outcomes. And I heard us say earlier that reaching a consensus among all stakeholders and managing files is really a challenge. Well, Coursera allows you to have all of your data in one place, and that's a really great first step to getting everyone on the same page. Things like missing trends that you might have missed otherwise, making sure that students really need the courses, or checking on how your programs are doing. So since our solutions or require just a single integration to your SIS and your LMS, you can start with what you need most and then easily expand over time, which I think Dennis kind of touched on earlier. So yeah, really quick overview of Course Dog, and I let you guys get to Q&A.
All right, amazing. Thanks, Janet. Well, I'm seeing a bunch of questions in the Q&A, which is wonderful. So we'll try to get to as many as we can, but if not, we will definitely follow up with you afterwards. Dennis, a question that I think is directed to you here. What considerations and challenges occurred to, meet some of those professional and accreditation standards? Does SACS have a review process when it comes to kind of, this integration process that you are working on?
Yeah, the accreditation and professional standards thing was a learning process for a lot of us because people are familiar with their own college or their own program, not necessarily with things outside of that. And so I learned a lot, for example, about the education programs and all the stuff they have to do to meet our Pennsylvania Department of Education requirements. And so, sometimes the accreditation would put kind of barriers to some things we wanted to do because people would write things in their course or their program, which the committee might feel like, hey, maybe you should revise those SLOs, or is that really the proper mode that this class is offered, etc. And people would say, well, our hands are tied. We have to do it this way because this is what our accrediting body says we have to do it like that. So there's working around, those kinds of accreditation requirements and finding where there was wiggle room, where there was room to maybe adapt things within, to keep a program to still have their accreditation or their professional licensure, so that students ultimately get a quality program coming out of it. But yeah, there's lots of those kinds of issues that came up, and that was a learning process for everybody, both faculty as well as administrators, of knowing, yes, a certain program has to meet certain requirements, and we don't have a lot of flexibility in that way. Not every program is like that though, which allows us to be a little more creative in how we design a particular program.
Great. Another question I'm seeing here, also I think directed to you, Dennis. I know that the University Curriculum Committee did a lot of work in this, but this individual is wondering, who ultimately is making a decision if a program was cut or, which of the three campuses it might be offered at.
Yeah, so ultimately, I believe it was our provost who made the final decision on all of those things. When it comes to all of this curriculum stuff, all of our different stages of review, we're very intentional at saying that every committee simply recommends or not recommends a particular course or program, and it's ultimately the provost who approves or not if that change is going forward. I think though the two provosts we've had so far in this integration, they've listened to the concerns. If there's a resource concern, if there's a concern about how this program is offered across three campuses, how is it taught out, how do we meet the needs of students, etc. Of course, not every decision satisfies everybody because there were hard decisions that had to be made. But yeah, ultimately it was our provost who made those final decisions on every curriculum matter.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing that, Dennis. All right, I think we have probably time for one more question here. I'm seeing a question here when it comes to thinking about integration of AI into curriculum and thinking about how you're making sure that you're market aligned there. Dennis, have you been seeing this come through, the university curriculum committee? How are you all thinking about this at Commonwealth?
Yeah, so the AI piece, unfortunately, we're maybe a little bit behind on that part because we've had to do all of this integration stuff. We just haven't devoted a lot of thought to AI, but I'm actually part of a kind of a separate group from the curriculum committee that's basically more of an informal group of faculty trying to kind of get us up to speed on AI and trying to talk about it more among our colleagues, start these conversations, et cetera. And so we're starting to see a few courses come through that explicitly talk about AI. We haven't used AI in terms of actually doing anything curriculum related, but we're starting to see some courses and stuff come through. There's a lot of questions that faculty have. I'm sure you all know the same concerns about academic honesty, plagiarism, all these different things that come with AI. So I think we're working through those sorts of things. But my personal opinion is that I think AI needs to be talked about in every class, every discipline, in ways that make sense for that discipline. Because I personally think it's not going away. I'm not necessarily in love with it, but it's here. Students are already using it. And so biology teachers need to teach their students how do they use it for biology. And English teachers need to teach how we use it appropriately for writing, etc. And so I think that's those changes are coming. It might be more of a kind of collaborative or sort of ground up sort of faculty talking to each other, talking to their disciplines, talking to alumni, et cetera. Because I think there's a lot of different directions that AI is going, a lot of different opinions out there. We're not really on the same page yet on there. But that definitely is something I've thought about, and a lot of our faculty and administrators are starting to think through more explicitly.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. Well, I know we're just at time now. We do have one final question here just for folks that might be interested in learning more. So just a really quick yes or no here if we want to go ahead and launch this real quick. But other than that, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Really appreciate the participation. A lot of great questions here. I know we didn't have time to get to all of them, so we will try to follow up with anyone who had additional questions. But thank you so much to Dennis for taking the time to share your expertise here. Really, really appreciate that. And thanks so much, everyone. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And our contact information is here. Like we said, we will make sure to send out the deck and recording so you'll be able to access it later.
Thank you, everybody.